Did you miss it? We made an announcement. We're going to be publishing the first season of Achewillow as a real, physical, can hold in your hands book. But we need your help to get it done. Head on over to achewillow.com/book to get all the details, including a few surprises. Achewillow Season 7 Chapter 9 The Long Shadow of Old Friends. I remember cooking school as if it were a snack ago. It was an ideal time of my life. I was in a stable relationship. I had like-minded friends. Every day I got to do my one favorite thing, and I was a superstar at it. Every morning I would stride into class, put on my whites, and be ready to devour the teachings of my betters while sampling the fruits of my own labors. After a hard day of knowledge being fed to me and my peers, I'd go home to the loving arms of my loyal boyfriend, and we'd whittle away the evening together. Some days I'd have to go to work as a barista, but again I would be surrounded by food and lovers of food. Except it never was this way, was it? Trevor started cheating on me halfway through my second semester. My friends, while nice and all, weren't exactly on the same level of either passion or experience. The same could be said for the vast majority of my teachers, and while most respected my self-taught go-getter approach, others resented my talent. Being a barista also did nothing but make me loathe the mainstream food industry and long for the day I could run my own business. There was a brief moment, though, when I did believe all the lies I told myself. What else was I supposed to do? Allow that poor, naive Miriam of my youth to suffer the full force of reality? It's only been a handful of years, and already I can see how fragile she was at the time. Gullibility as a way to protect herself was the right choice, until it wasn't. That's why I admire Petunia Marshall. She was born into the lie, brought up in the illusion. Even as a child, she wore the blinders her parents had made her. They came in the shape of white robes and daily service. She could have kept going like that, safe in the knowledge that there was a greater power looking over her, and there was an answer for everything in the world. Pete is strong. When she decided that the illusions and protections stood in the way of what she wanted, she shed it all. Like a beautiful snake, molting the used layer to reveal a fresh skin underneath. Seeing her at my counter right now, I envy her anew. Not only for the strength it took to break away, but for the courage it takes to be here at all. Even knowing what brought her back to Achewillow, I remain glad she's here. "How's it going, Miss Dufour?" Petunia grins like someone trying to tear the cheekbones right off her face. "Don't start with me, Petunia." I prefer Pete. And I prefer Miriam, but you started it. I'm also smiling. So much, in fact, it hurts. I know there's an intervention coming. That's the whole point of this. It doesn't prevent me from savoring the joy of this reunion. Awkward seconds trickle by as I race around the counter to the front of the register, all so I can give Pete a warm hug. She damn near snaps my spine in return, and although I'm not the most physically expressive person in the world, I enjoy every moment of our reunion. The weight of that fall when I discovered the Donselites and the secret nightlife of Achewillow forever binding me to this young woman. "Mother!" I exclaim, pulling back. "You've been working out?" Her smile turns a little sheepish, as if apologizing for someone else's crime. "Big move. Big life changes. It's been a busy couple of years." Damn, where are my manners? Have a seat. Not that one. That's Annabelle's place. And that... I stop, pointing at the stool where Olivia usually sits. Funny how people go in and out of my life like they do the cafe. This rotating cast of characters that will fit into a specific place, be gone for a while, and then be back again later. "Take that one," I catch myself saying. Hesitation like that doesn't go unnoticed, but it does slip by unmentioned. Instead, we trade pleasantries and catch up. If I thought my reunion with Pete was emotional, Annabelle's is even more touching. Their embrace stretching for almost a minute as they whisper in each other's ears. I suspect they're the kind of things childhood friends ask each other, those little secrets and private exchanges that bind. I should be working, preparing tomorrow's food and helping Stefan through the rush, but I can't be bothered. While she borrows Olivia's seat, Pete brings her own cheer and familiarity to the Achewillow. And for that little moment in time, all good things are in the right place. A fleeting illusion, of course. All participants are changed and the topics are wrong, but like having breakfast for dinner, it kind of works. "Another witch, you say?" Pete asks, unable to hide her bewilderment. "Leave it to Achewillow to become interesting the moment I move out." "Has Achewillow ever not been interesting?" I ask, clearing plates from the counter. "I don't think anyone's old enough to remember this place having ever been boring," Annabelle adds. "But things have gotten a little more lively since Doris passed." I put the dishes in the bussing tray and give Stefan a quick look, making sure he's still comfortable handling things alone. In the back of my mind, I make a note to thank him, probably with a bonus or some extra time off, whatever he'll accept and I can afford. The mention of Doris's death leaves silence in its wake. Everyone had their own relationship with her here, and there's no forgetting that completely. We're creeping up on half a decade since her passing, and still her shadow looms long. Then again, I'm beginning to learn that all Dufour witches leave deep marks in the soil of this town, and I feel like I'm only scratching the surface myself. Lunch is old news, and dinner has come and gone. The hours reduced to crumbs faster than cookies in a toddler's hands. Night is already spreading over Achewillow like so much buttercream on a sponge. We're deep into the night, and the cafe should be closed, but the chatter won't stop. Annabelle helped herself to my modest stash of liquor, if only to mix mango juice and vodka. College cocktails to drink the nostalgia we're already tasting. "You know," Pete says, lifting the drink to her lips, "we should do brunch tomorrow, or breakfast, unless you're busy." She leers at me, making no secret of her accusation. And there we are. It's not how I imagined the two of them would corner me. I thought it would be more confrontational, or that Annabelle would slide us into the topic with her unique lack of tact. "Subtle as flambe," I say. "Annabelle already told you of my obligations, I'm sure. And I bet you're here to warn me to stay away from the Pilvists? That there's no miracle for me there?" Pete makes no further effort at theatrics. She doesn't play coy. She doesn't prevaricate around the bush. Instead, she leans forward, letting her hair fall around her face like curtains. She narrows her eyes and stretches her lips thin. "Miriam," she says, calm like a tutor about to explain a complex problem. "The Pilvists have plenty of miracles to offer. That's why you should stay the hell away from them." I swirl the remains of my cocktail at the bottom of my mug. The mango juice separated from the vodka a little, leaving a thick orange residue under translucent liquor. I regret not drinking more before we got to this area of the conversation. Standing my ground on shaky legs might not be the wisest decision, but if I'm going to take one on the chin for my choices, it'd be nice if I were more numb. "Pete, where's Fred?" "Don't change the subject. This is serious." "I am being serious. Where's Fred?" Pete pulls back from the counter. She smells a trap under the aroma of vodka and pastries. This is supposed to be a reunion, a lovely night amongst friends who haven't had a chance to talk in years. "He's back home and sends his best. Did I tell you we have dogs now? Felt right, you know." "Nice," I nod. It does seem apropos, but what would you do if something happened to him? How far would you go to save him? Would you go back to Ian and the Great Cloud for one of those miracles? The question doesn't make many waves as it lands. I have a feeling that Pete's already considered such a scenario before, or if she hasn't, there was never a reason to even think about it. No, she says, confirming half my theory. I wouldn't. First of all, that'd mean dealing with my parents, and I'm not ready to do that yet. But more to the point, the so-called Great Cloud doesn't have that kind of miracle. Look, I know about Olivia. Annabelle told me. Duh. And I don't even know that much about the Great Cloud. I'm not like you, or Doris, or even Ian, I guess. But you think you're the first one to go ask the big strange cloud in the sky for a favor? Nicoletta Rodriguez's parents came to ceremonies for weeks after she disappeared. That didn't stop Detective Lamore from finding her body 4 years ago. And they're not the only ones who've come pulling at Ian's robes, hoping for a miracle. The Great Cloud just isn't that kind of goddess. Old fear floats up from the bottom of my psyche, stirred by Pete's words and the confidence with which she speaks them. Thoughts of demons posing as gods and other nameless entities flood my mind. Things that prowl Achewillow's alleys at night or roam the forests under stormy clouds conspire with the alcohol in my veins to send shivers up my spine. What kind of goddess is she? I expect horrors that grant poison wishes and take more than they offer, but Pete seems too relaxed for such dire revelations. Yet she isn't glad like the bearer of good news should be. A nature goddess, she says. A nature goddess locked in a white, puffy cage. I did not abstain from the morning service. In fact, I even wore the robes this time. The fabric did not feel as I once thought it would. When Ian gave me the box with the robes, promising that the gift was not binding in any way and that I should only wear them once I felt ready, the white linen was soft under my touch. It had a light, almost ethereal feeling to it. Now that it rests over my shoulders, it is no longer the gossamer vestment of faith I thought it to be. The parallels to a cloud are lost in the sudden weight of context. These are a warden's robes, if there is such a thing. Simultaneously, they feel like prisoner's clothes, restrictive of movement, loose where they shouldn't be, and tight in all the wrong places. Despair drives me. A trapped nature goddess is a goddess still, and assuming the descriptor fits, then that means... What does that mean? I walk down the streets, attracting more looks than I care to receive. Pilvists aren't a rare sight in Achewillow, nor one that's a cause for much reaction. It's a little like seeing hippies in full 60s attire. Enough to do a double take, but so harmless that they're just as quickly forgotten. But seeing Miriam Dufour wearing the white robes? That's worthy of notice and gossip. Twisting necks and curious stares don't register as I make my way, however. So consumed am I with speculation about the Great Cloud's true nature and potential. My reasoning is simple, childish even. Death is natural, or so I've been told 6 times, and a nature goddess would have dominion over all things natural, and thus over death. I've been feeding this cloud premium croissants for 3 years. Surely we can come to some quid pro quo. And if croissants aren't enough, I'm in a good position to sweeten the deal. Well, she's angry, Petunia answered when I asked if the Pilvists were trying to help the goddess or keep her prisoner. Who wants an angry deity loose in the world? So what? They're jailers? I asked without judgment. Who am I to question the motives of others when it pertains to gods and devils? I've chained one demon and delivered another to patients locked in a plastic container like it was leftovers. Making the dead dance on a string of cakes and hot dogs doesn't put me on any ethical high ground either. All that to say, if the Pilvists are keeping an angry goddess in check, it's probably for the best. Right? Walking under the shadow of that cloud takes on a whole new meaning as I approach the old house. I can almost feel an ancient eye turned in my direction as I walk up the steps to the door. A presence older than the forest behind the backyard, Although it floats in the sky unchanged since I've moved here, I can now feel the weight of the great cloud. "What is that?" Ian asks as he opens the door. "That's something I've noticed about the cult. Although I've always thought of Ian as their leader, there doesn't seem to be a fixed hierarchy to the group. The head of the Pilvists is more of a de facto symptom of personality than a dictatorship or even democracy. No one elected Ian as the leader, and he doesn't refer to himself that way. He just does leader things and the rest do follower things. Most of the time. Those," I nudged the 2 extra boxes in my arms, "are treats." He waves me in, raising an eyebrow in the process. "We don't need treats," he admonishes in a soft voice. "Only the croissants." I ignore his rebuttal and walk myself towards the dining room where the ceremony is to take place. Don't need treats? How dare he? "I'm wearing the robes, aren't I? I think that's worthy of celebrating." I hand him the croissants and put the rest of my offering on a dish cabinet. With a twist of my thumbs, I flip the cardboard lids open, releasing the sweet smell of roasted pecans and caramel into the room. Every head and every nose turns in my direction. It may be my imagination, but even the table of ancient wood seems to shiver with anticipation. "Besides," I add, "you can't ask me to stop being me." For the first time in 3 years, I see something a little dark pass over Ian's features, like a brief shadow when the sun is obscured by a low-flying cloud in summer. The marshals are certainly intrigued by my gift, and Detective Lamore has a hard time hiding his curiosity, although whether it's professional interest or a sweet tooth is difficult to ascertain. Just as fast as the teasing perfume sweetened the air, it was shut down. Ian, nearly pushing me out of the way, closes both boxes, one with each hand, with just as much reverence as he handles the croissants. "Those smell wonderful, Miriam, but they'll have to wait until after the service. It's just the way we do things here." Everyone looks at each other before nodding in agreement. Who knows if this is a new rule formulated on the spot, or if it's something that's been brought up before. Ian doesn't order the flock to agree with him. They just do. Followers doing what followers do. "Of course," I agree. "But I always leave here a little peckish, and I thought we could all enjoy a little something to get the day started. After." With a smile of satisfaction, I go take my place at the head of the table, the same seat I was assigned on my first morning amongst the faithful. The service proceeds as normal, with Ian placing the croissants on a serving plate, and then at the table opposite me. Soon, the surface of ancient wood will come alive. It will grow and thrive, branching out to touch and entwine itself around the Pilvists. The life cycle will move quickly, and the vines will ensnare the croissants. Before long, this avatar of nature will sprout flowers like Venus flytraps and devour my buttery pastries. When all is consumed to the very last crumb, the flowers will bloom into fruits and then rot down to seeds, and thus the circle will be complete. Branches no older than a few minutes will dry and break off from the table, leaving it smooth and polished, as if new. But to the observant eye, the texture of the grain will have changed, knots will have moved, and even the shape of the edges will have shifted. Except there's a hesitation this time. A wave courses through the wood, but it doesn't immediately herald the process of growth. Instead, the wave repeats again and again. Only when Ian begins to show signs of impatience, his brow furrowing and his eyes scanning the participants, does the ritual get back on track. This small hiccup, nothing but a bump in the road, is like a clove of garlic in his chocolate mousse. Throughout it all, Ian grimaces and glares, scrutinizing every moment of the ceremony for further hesitation and irregularities. In the end, it's on me that his eyes settle, but just as soon as he makes me his target, the frown stops weighing down his features and his beatific smile returns. Was this a crack in a mask, Or did Ian simply go through a brief crisis of faith? One thing's for sure, this sort of irregularity has never happened before. Shuffling their feet, the Pilvists are slow to claim their seeds, each looking at the others with a mix of fear and trepidation that tempts me to anxiety. Once they have their communal reward, each consuming their seed, the mood seems to stabilize. Like a cake rising in the oven before settling down again, changing from batter to sponge. I deposit my own prize behind my robes, dropping it into my pocket, then saunter over to the dish cabinet and, with a proud smile, pop open the boxes again. There's no longer enough cooped-up caramel perfume to spread through the enormous dining room, but I expect the memory of earlier will be enough to draw the crowd. Every face on display here is a regular at the Achewillow Cafe. They've all paid good money for cookies and muffins before and should be thrilled for the free samples. Perks, I think, of opening their doors to Miriam Dufour. And hopefully a shortcut to earning the Great Cloud's favor. At least, that's how I expect things to go. But like cold fire or dry water, my fellow cultists show no interest in my delicious caramel and pecan brioche. Bewildered by the sudden and inexplicable indifference, I stuff half a brioche in my own face. I make a show of savoring it, like a mother trying to convince a child to eat the Brussels sprouts. Nothing. Ever observant, Detective Lamore is the one to eventually notice my confusion, baked into a heavy crust of embarrassment. His thin lips stretch a little, and he scratches his ample forehead as he approaches. "It's very kind of you, Madame Dufour," he says, closing one of the boxes. "But I'm afraid we're all quite full now." "From a single seed?" He shrugs, an old man satisfied with having no explanation to give. "Maybe it's psychosomatic, but yes, indeed, from a single seed." Everyone else, from Ian to the marshals, gives me the same apologetic grin. "Oops," they seem to say with their eyes. "Forgot to leave room for dessert. Sorry, Mom." A look thrown at the table again, angry at its wooden surface for stealing my thunder, and I notice another shiver upon its surface. "Here." Lamore closes the second box and picks it up. "Let me help you bring those back home. Maybe the walk will work up an appetite." It's a little bit more of a chill trip back to the cafe. The sun struggles to show its face from between the clouds, but especially to peek around the Great One. Would it be strange if I took it personally? Like petty vengeance for bringing my own food and daring to compete with the table's seeds? The lack of sun does nothing to stop the wind from dragging northern air, blowing it through the streets and between the alleyways. "Forgive me for saying," I pipe up after a few minutes of silence, "but I never pictured you as the religious type, let alone a cloud worshipper." Despite my best efforts, there was no dissuading Detective Lamore from carrying both boxes of caramel and pecan brioche. I brought them here, and I can bring them back myself, but Lamore is an old gentleman with old gentleman values, which makes his presence in the hippie cult of white-robed nature lovers all the stranger. "And I expected you to have already been indoctrinated, Madame Dufour. Yet here we are, aren't we?" While his words are dismissive, the gentle smirk on his face reassures me that he isn't. The detective isn't one to waste his breath, leaning on sparse words to make his points. He's a man of efficiency, and unlike his American counterpart, he's a consummate professional that doesn't rely on theatrics. I've always preferred Detective Wilson's company, but Lamore is who I'd pick if I needed results. "Oh? Why would you think that?" I've always wondered how much Lamore knew about the extracurricular activities of the owners of the Achewillow Cafe. Wilson is already too preoccupied with his own accoutrement and pageantry to pay that kind of attention, but the older detective is one more likely to watch and listen, picking up on the quiet details others would leave behind. It's his job, but also part of his nature. "Nothing, but Doris and I were of a generation. 25 years age gap doesn't mean as much when you're our age. The old witch would prattle on about tea leaves and chicken bones, but not always on the topic of beverages and broths. It's easy to assume any relative of hers, especially one who'd take over the Achewillow, would be into this robes and patchouli stuff. Old witch. It came out like a term of endearment, but the words still send a chill up my spine, and it doesn't go unnoticed. We weren't really good friends, your grandaunt and I, he explains with measured regret. Not that I didn't appreciate her as a person, but not a year would go by without me finding her nose in one of my investigations. An infuriating woman at times. This, more than anything, takes me back. No one ever says anything bad about the formidable Doris Dufour. The church needs 2 bell towers, and the Pilvists have to lean on a supernatural cloud, yet neither can cast a shadow over the memory of my great-grandaunt. In life, as in death, everyone loves Doris. Except, it seems, Detective Lamore. Shocked into silence, we walk another block without a word exchanged. I can see the hair on the back of his hands stand on end as another chill gust of wind brushes over them. We cross the invisible border between countries, the only hint of the change a bank of CCTV cameras that covers every angle of the intersection that turns Main Street into Rue Principale. Lamore nods the cluster of mechanical eyes as he might a colleague. "So what made you turn to the great cloud?" I ask, suffering under its shadow. He does that thing old men do when they're thinking, chewing his own saliva and grinding his jaw as if he were actually ruminating on ideas. "Actually, I would have to say it all started with you, Madame Dufour." The old man is full of surprises today. "Do you remember how we first met?" he asks. "When I found Clara's body behind the bank. We never put a lid on that case. Aaron told me not to worry about it." A pause. "But I do. I worry about it all the time." It's weird knowing more than Lamore about his own cases. I suspect it happened a lot with Doris, and that's why she was so infuriating. "The murders have stopped, though," I mumble. "Have they, Madame Dufour? Last I checked, we had at least 5 mysterious deaths in the time since. The MO has changed, but I'm having trouble dismissing the cases as unrelated." Hands in my pockets, I can feel the keys to the Achewillow, just as real as the keys to these mysteries he talks about. My finger runs over their teeth as my mind recalls the details of many of the deaths that troubled Julian Lamore. Talking about Clara seems to have transported us to the corner near the bank. I can map in my mind the path that would take us to the exact place where I found her disemboweled corpse. Vivid as a summer garden, the memory washes over me. "And the Pilvist faith helps you find peace with it all?" The old man shuffles his shoulders, recalibrating his hold on my boxes. Gallantry is all well and good, but it's a long walk from the Pilvist temple to the Achewillow, and for all his vitality, Lamore still shows his age. "No," he says with a dry chuckle. "The Pilvists were always second on my list of suspects. Ritualistic murders and strange cults go hand in hand. Once Mr. Kemper was forced from the top of my list, I refocused my efforts towards the Pilvists." "Did you find what you expected?" Did I expect a living table to devour croissants and spit out magic seeds? No, Madame Dufour, I did not. It has, however, opened my eyes to a new facet of Achewillow I never knew was there. A side glance tells me there's more to it than just a man taking his first glance at the underbelly of Achewillow. It's becoming tired to point out, but he's old, and he's from the village. A lifetime in Achewillow, I've learned, comes with at least some bizarre baggage. So many traditions bring the youth of this place within spitting distance of unnatural forces. It seems improbable that Lamore's avoided contact for so long. Logical conclusions aside, there's also that intangible quality to his features, that glint in his eyes as he ponders those memories. Lamore is a man of facts and evidence. Unlike Detective Wilson, who leans on gut instinct and hunches, Julian would never attribute to the supernatural what must instead be rooted in the natural world. His monsters and demons are the human sort. Lamore has seen things. That much is obvious. But up until he sat at the Pilvists table, he'd found a way to rationalize the things he'd witnessed. "Anything in particular?" I ask, curious to know what rocks he might be turning over to see what crawls beneath, but also afraid that he might turn that attention to the Achewillow. "A few things," he says, repositioning the boxes again. It's tempting to take them off his hands, but I doubt refusing his chivalry would go over well. Besides, discomfort loosens his tongue. "First," he begins, "there are a handful of cases I've had to abandon because they were so cold you could put them in a drink. Once you introduce less tangible variables into the mix, the murders of Clara, Anais, Candace, Nicoletta, and Hannah take on a different light. The evidence loses its rigidity, and some clues that made no sense, while still absurd, can now be fit into the puzzle. None of this I can work through official channels, and I have to put in the hours on my own time. But maybe it's something I can focus on during retirement." He looks into the distance, cocking his head as if deep in thought. His footsteps slow to a crawl. Lamore is a professional amongst professionals, but like me, he's also a vocationalist. That is one thing he shares with Aaron Wilson. While they both approach the job from completely different angles, the two of them have the same passion for it. It isn't something they do, it's part of who they are. "And second?" I ask. "Second?" He looks distracted. "You said first, so I assume there's more." Lamore's lips tighten, his focus still lost to the other end of Rue Principale. He moves his jaw around, chewing food that isn't there, struggling to bring his attention back to the conversation. "Yes, well, you see, it's more of the same. Another cold case, but a case that was never a case. A murder that wasn't a murder. The kind of thing that got shoved under the rug because it was too strange to even be considered for an official investigation." He finally tears his attention from the street and back to me. The focus he gave the edge of Rue Principale is aimed at me, and I can feel those pale old eyes struggling to read my features. He's doing that thing where you do your level best to know what someone's thinking before giving them bad news, or telling a joke that you're not sure is going to land right. So, I put on my brave face and wait for it. "I want to look into the death of your aunt." He lays it out bluntly, tearing off the proverbial Band-Aid with one quick jolt. If I cry, then I cry, but at least the worst will be over with. But, as many before him, Lamore misunderstands my relationship to Doris. She wasn't my aunt, but my great-grand-aunt. I never met the woman, and while I have a soft spot for her memory in my heart, the topic of her death doesn't shake me the way people assume it should. Sadness might not be the emotion that finds me, but curiosity perks its head. "I heard some rumors," I say, trying to tease out more information from the detective. It works. "Whatever you've heard, Madame Dufour, the truth is far stranger. If you have the stomach for it, I can go over what little I have." His gaze returns to the streets, and his voice goes down in volume, becoming barely audible over the sounds of traffic and commerce. "Perhaps you'll have some perspective to add." His comment trails off, and his eyes narrow. I hunger to dig deeper into this conversation, to learn more about what Detective Lamore knows of the death of Doris Dufour. I can't imagine the truth being weirder than what I've heard, but Achewillow has seldom disappointed on the topic of high strangeness. However, keeping the detective's attention is a losing battle. Whatever it is that keeps pulling at him must be more than the overactive musings of an old sleuth. Turning to see what's got him so enthralled, I see nothing in the street that's out of the ordinary. And that's the mistake. A few cars travel up and down Rue Principale, passing inches from other vehicles parked on the street. A dozen pedestrians are walking in and out of shops, some leaving work for their lunch breaks while others go about their purchases. In the distance, a block beyond the Achewillow Cafe, there's a truck. I've seen it 100 times, parked in front of my coffee shop and in other places. For months, it was parked where it is right now, long enough to become normal. Except, it hasn't been there in a while. It hasn't been anywhere in Achewillow in a long time now. The red of the paint job bright in the spring sun, the chrome trimming and exhaust glitter like waves over the horizon. I'd know that truck anywhere. Speak of the devil, Lamore says after a moment. Isn't that Edmund Gulliver Kemper's truck? Achewillow is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Achewillow to donate. Achewillow has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Achewillow for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Achewillow.